Good afternoon, my beautiful babettes. I'm your resident active advocate, and today's video is going to be on the Disney feature animated feature, Pinocchio. Alright, so this one came not immediately after Snow White. There were shorts and things like that in between. But this one, I think, has a very prominent and powerful and negative disability narrative in it. When Pinocchio, and for any of you who have seen this movie, you know that he is a puppet. When Pinocchio was made by Geppetto, the carpenter, he was made as a puppet, right? Geppetto didn't have any biological children. So, right from the get-go, Pinocchio's number one wish and Geppetto's number one wish is for Pinocchio to become a real boy, a flesh and blood boy, right? The adult in me would ask, okay, why didn't you just get married and have a son in that case? But that's not the conceit of this story. The whole conceit of this story is that the Blue Fairy, who is Pinocchio's kind of guardian angel sort of thing, comes to him and to Geppetto and says that if Pinocchio can prove himself to be a good, honest, hardworking boy, that she will turn him eventually into a real boy. As a puppet, Pinocchio is portrayed as being at least somewhat clumsy, and he is also portrayed as being very ignorant and very naive. When his conscience, Jiminy Cricket, is given to him, always let your conscience be your guide. It's that little voice chirping in your ear. So a cricket is actually quite a good analogy in this case. The original story, by the way, from which this was taken is quite disturbing. If you want a really interesting read, go read the book. But in the Disney version, Pinocchio spends much of the movie ignoring the guiding voice, ignoring his conscience, and going off to do what is fun and what is easy and what will gain him a quick buck or quick fame, so on and so forth. And throughout this whole time, he's a puppet, even though during the song, I have no strings to hold me down, he sings about how he's a very free-moving puppet, but in that sequence, he makes a fool of himself by falling over several times and making a mess of the whole show. But eventually, when he does prove himself to be not only hardworking and good and loyal and listens to his conscience, but he also saves his maker's life. He saves Geppetto's life from the belly of the whale, and almost gets turned into matchwood in exchange for his good deed. That is an analogy that I will explore, but the Blue Fairy comes in at the end of the story and resurrects him and also makes him into a real boy, which had been his wish the whole time. In the sense of this being a disability narrative, the whole thing about Pinocchio being made of wood and being very clumsy, that could definitely be portrayed as a physical disability, right? So he's not able to stand on his own 2 feet very well. He can't move very freely. He's not all that good at getting around on his own. And he needs Jiminy Cricket, a very small, quick, free-moving creature, to look after him. And through all of that, his only wish is not even to be a good person. His whole wish is to be the, quote, right kind of person. He wants to be a, quote, real boy, right? As I say, at the end, he is turned into a flesh and blood human, but only after giving his life for it. In the sense of this being a disability narrative, I also find this a rather offensive version of the Cure narrative, because not only is he literally killed by sacrificing himself for his father figure, but he's then resurrected and made, quote, normal and valuable by the standards set up by the movie, by Geppetto, by the Blue Fairy, by Pinocchio himself, he's turned into this valuable asset, a real boy. And the whole problem with that is that it basically says you have to get rid of what makes you individual, what makes you special, what makes you unique, actually, to be a person of value. Disability does not have to be taken, as I have said many times, as a form of deficit. It is a difference. It is not it is not a deficit. You see throughout the movie that there are sentient and bipedal animals going around, right? You see throughout the movie that kids who are bad are turned into donkeys. But everyone is staring not at that, but at this puppet boy who can walk. It's like, oh wow, what an anomaly. But he doesn't want to be different from everyone else in that way. Even though it's what makes him who he is, it's what makes him special. He is defined by the fact that he is a puppet who does not want to be a puppet. So that's pretty much his only character trait. And the biggest problem I have with this narrative, though, is that he's not doing good for the sake of doing good. He's doing good for the sake of the miracle cure, quotation marks, right? He's only, at first at least, doing good so that he can have his wish, because the Blue Fairy makes that deal with him and Geppetto. And the problem with that is that not only would that set up unrealistic expectations for anyone who was born with a disability or who acquired a disability, that if they can do well enough, be good enough, and earn it. I know that this is the model of the American dream, but that's the problem I have. You can't, quote, earn your, quote, cure. And who's to say that it even is a cure? Like I say, it's part of what makes him a very compelling character. He's still a boy. He has the mind and heart of a boy, but in the body of a puppet. What's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with that. But Geppetto wanted a, quote, real son, and Pinocchio, just by instinct it seems, wants to be a, quote, real boy to fill his father's need, to fill his father's desire, but also for his own sake, because he feels, as he is, inadequate. For a person to feel inadequate by the standard with which they were born, or the standard that they acquire through injury or illness or anything like that, any sort of disability making you feel inferior, that, I believe, that whole mindset is on society, and it is also on the unrealistic expectations set up for you by the people around you. Much as their intentions may be good, because remember that they too are also conditioned by society. Geppetto was conditioned to want a flesh and blood son. If you go into the meta-narrative of this, the whole reason why he builds this puppet is for companionship, and he wishes for it to come to life. But then that's not enough. It also has to be a, quote, real boy, and be able to move and play and act just as a real boy would. But doesn't he already? There may be differences there, but that doesn't make it bad. He doesn't fundamentally, by the way, change his core character. When he becomes a real boy, that's the end of the story. You don't see any further character development. But, he has, as I say, the spirit and the heart of a boy, and he stays that way throughout the movie. It's a rather nuanced take because, morality wise, he does get better, but there was always that potential there anyway. The Blue Fairy even says it's all a choice. You have the ability to do this, obviously, or else I wouldn't be here offering you this deal at all. She's not giving him any special power. It's all already up here, in his head, in his heart. And I don't think that changing the exterior changed the interior. So really, the whole problem I have with this movie is, what's even the point, other than to fulfill these arbitrary social expectations of you must be and look and do like this, not like this. even though it doesn't change actually who you are in here, in your mind and in your heart. That, though, translates into the real world with surgeries that, can treat or cure disabilities. Take a case like really bad scoliosis. This is another narrow tube defect. We've talked about those before with hydrocephalus and spina bifida, but take a bad case of scoliosis where you may have a curvature in the spine. But what if you're fine the way you are? In Cracking India, the main character, she is not very well able to use her legs and to walk, but she's fine the way she is. The whole problem I have with this narrative is, why can't we just let be what is? Why can't we just leave it the way it is if the person is fine with how it is? But Pinocchio is conditioned by Geppetto's wishes and by society not to like being a puppet. From day one, the whole deal is, if you can do this much, if you can act this way, if you can be a fundamentally good person, then you get the miracle. Then and only then. But that, again, is very unrealistic, because that's not how it works. If you've had a very bad accident and you can no longer use a part of your body or anything analogous to that, just being a good person is not going to bring that back. If it can be brought back at all, by the way, I might say. That would take a good deal of medical intervention. It would take a good deal of work on your part, physical work, though, not spiritual. But is the goal, then, even to get back what you had? Or should the goal be to live as you are and to be okay as you are, and not to let society tell you that you are not okay as you are? So that, as I see it, is the narrative behind Pinocchio if read through this lens. And Disney's understanding and portrayal of disability does evolve through time, as I said yesterday with Snow White. But it does not start off well. It goes for some bumpy rides before it gets a little bit smoother towards the end. And it also stretches out into different branches of disability throughout the history of the movies. Like, when we get to Frozen, I will be talking not about physical disability, but about neuroatypicality, as I did yesterday with Dopey. And I think that will be an interesting conversation, but that's a long time coming, because Disney's catalog is huge, and I like it because it gives me a lot of material to work with. All right, so that is the video. Thank you for your lovely and wonderful attention and participation. And what day is it today? Okay, I will see you all tomorrow for another video. I don't know what movie I'm doing yet. Disney has this huge list of feature-length movies that I need to look through and see which one I want to dissect next. All right. Thank you very much. Have a lovely, wonderful afternoon. Mwah.